Hey everyone, hope you're doing great. Welcome back to my channel. In today's video, we'll dive into what if Deku was a cyberpunk hacker with a tech-based quirk. Smash that subscribe button, and be sure to peek at the description below. Let's begin. The rain in Neomuzidifa wasn't just weather, it was an institution, a relentless, percussive liquid that washed the grime from one surface only to deposit it on another. It fell with a steady, metronomic rhythm against the cheap plexiglass awnings and corroded metal fire escapes of the Undercity, a permanent soundtrack to a life lived in the long, dark shadows of giants. Above, so impossibly high that its peaks were often lost in the perpetual toxic smog layer that capped the lower levels like a dirty glass ceiling, the spire gleamed. It was a forest of chrome and crystal towers that stabbed at the heavens, their perpetually lit windows forming a new, man-made constellation of wealth and untouchable power. The spire didn't experience rain. It experienced atmospheric cleansing cycles, its hydrophobic surfaces repelling the acidic water that perpetually soaked the world below. Down here, in the Undercity, light was a borrowed and bruised commodity. Towering holographic advertisements, their projectors mounted on the sides of buildings centuries old, flickered and buzzed with schizophrenic intensity. They cast the perpetually damp streets and the faces of the people who trudged through them in shifting, transient hues of electric blue, garish magenta, and a sickly, pervasive chartreuse. A colossal, 50-foot geisha with synthetic, unblinking eyes would wink slowly, advertising Omnigen's new line of quirk-enhancing energy drinks that promise focus but deliver jitters. A moment later, she'd glitch and be replaced by a phalanx of heavily armored pro-heroes sponsored by the same company, their smiles as polished and artificial as their armor. Overhead, squadrons of gleaming white security drones, also bearing the ubiquitous, stylized O of the Omnigen logo, hummed on their patrols. Their optical sensors, cold blue dots, swept the crowds with a sterile, judgmental indifference, a constant, hovering promise of security that felt infinitely more like a threat. This was Izuku Midoriya's world. A world of stark, vertical divides, the powerful in the sky, the powerless on the ground. A world where heroism was a syndicated, publicly traded commodity and justice had a price tag, usually sponsored by the very corporations that bled the Undercity dry. His apartment was a testament to his place in this world, a quiet act of defiance nestled within the belly of the beast. Tucked away on the 47th floor of the Asahi residential block, a crumbling concrete monolith that swayed with a disconcerting groan whenever the maglev trains rumbled past on the elevated tracks outside. It was less a home and more a digital nest. The main room was a chaotic symphony of scavenged and repurposed technology. Thick bundles of wires, meticulously organized with colored zip ties, snaked across the floor like metallic vines, connecting a mismatched array of monitors, stripped-down server towers humming in open-air racks, and a series of jury-rigged cooling fans that whirred valiantly against the oppressive, machine-generated heat and the city's natural humidity. The air was thick with the distinct, charged smell of ozone, the ghost of stale instant noodles, and the faint, sweet scent of melting solder. Izuku sat in the center of it all, a small, unassuming figure hunched in a worn-out ergonomic chair he'd proudly fished from a corporate dumpster behind the Spire's financial district. Its lumbar support was shot, but it was better than the crate he'd used before. His face, usually soft and peppered with a constellation of freckles, was illuminated by the collective glow of 5 different screens, his expression a mask of preternatural, intense concentration. His green hair, an untamable mess on the best of days, was matted with sweat against his forehead. Tonight, he wasn't Izuku Midoriya, the quiet, anxious quirk analysis nerd who fixed comm chips for his neighbors for a few credits. Tonight, he was Zero. A ghost. A non-entity. A whisper in the global network that could unravel fortunes. The name was a reclamation, a piece of digital armor forged from the cruelest taunt of his childhood. Deku. Useless. Worthless. He'd taken their insult, the word that had defined his powerlessness, and hollowed it out, filling it with a new, potent meaning. A starting point. The origin. The value from which all things begin. Zero. His target was displayed in crisp, corporate font on the central monitor, Kageyama Financial. On paper, they were a legitimate, if ruthless, mid-tier investment firm. In the tangled web of the net, they were a subsidiary shell corporation, one of dozens of cleverly disguised tentacles used by the monolithic Omnigen to launder money, manipulate markets, and subtly squeeze the life out of any independent business in the Undercity that showed a hint of promise. And tonight, Kageyama Financial was going to make a significant, anonymous, and entirely unwilling charitable donation. "All right," Izuku murmured, his voice a dry rasp in the quiet hum of the room. He cracked his knuckles, a familiar pre-ritual that settled his nerves and focused his mind. "Time to do some good." He leaned forward, his reflection a pale, green-tinged ghost in the dark screen of the monitor to his left, and closed his eyes. For a moment, there was only the familiar sensory input, the muffled, rhythmic drumming of the rain, the chorus of his cooling fans, the low, steady thrum of the city's massive electrical grid vibrating through the floor. Then, with a practiced mental shift, he let it all go. The world dissolved. The physical reality of his cluttered apartment, the piles of data chips, the half-eaten bowl of noodles, the sprawling, rain-swept city outside his window, bled away into a uniform, muted gray. The sounds faded to a dull, distant roar, like listening to the world through a thick wall of water. In their place, a new reality bloomed in his mind's eye, a universe of pure information made manifest. This was his quirk, the strange, beautiful, and dangerous gift he'd been born with. Data weave. The room, his entire world, was now a three-dimensional, navigable tapestry of light. It was breathtaking, a sight no one else on Earth could ever witness. Shimmering, incandescent threads of every conceivable color crisscrossed the space, pulsing with latent and active energy. A loose, chaotic web of faint, gossamer-thin silver lines represented the public comms network, drifting like spider silk on an invisible breeze. The heavily encrypted signal from his own custom-built router was a tight, braided cord of brilliant emerald green, a lifeline that snaked from his console, through the wall, and out into the infinite web of the city. And there, standing out like a freshly spilled drop of blood, was the data line he was looking for. It was a thick, angry, blood-red artery of pure data, the direct fiber line connecting Kageyama Financial to the global exchange. He could perceive it all. The flow, the speed, the texture, the temperature. He could feel the arrogant, ceaseless hum of corporate data, the sheer volume of credits and commands that pulsed within it. This was what made him zero. Other hackers, even the best, stared at lines of code on a screen, deciphering a foreign language. Izuku didn't need a translator. He saw the language in its native, physical form. He didn't just read the code, he swam in it, touched it, spoke it. With a phantom extension of his will, a projection of his consciousness, Izuku reached out. His focus narrowed with pinpoint precision on that crimson thread. His fingers, intangible yet guided by a lifetime of instinct, brushed against its surface. It felt warm, almost hot, and thrummed with a low-frequency vibration. It was slick with layers of passive encryption. He followed it, his consciousness soaring out of his apartment, a phantom passenger on a river of light, streaking through the digital ether of Neomuzurifu at the speed of thought. He arrived at the gateway to their primary server in a nanosecond. In his perception, it manifested as a solid, 10-foot wall of interwoven, pulsing red light, a formidable barrier of energy, the first firewall. To a normal hacker, this would be a page of impossibly complex, rotating encryption keys, a digital fortress to be assaulted with algorithms and brute force cracking programs over hours or even days. To Izuku, it was a lock. A very tangible, very physical knot. He flexed his phantom fingers and began his work. He didn't smash it. He didn't try to force it. That was noisy, clumsy, and left behind fragments of broken code like digital fingerprints. He was a ghost, and ghosts leave no trace. Instead, he found the anchor points, the key structural threads that held the entire defensive code together. They felt different from the others, coarser to his unique senses, like scratchy, industrial-grade rope woven through fine silk. The friction of the security protocols grated against his concentration, a low hum of pressure building behind his eyes. It was a standard corporate defense, simple for him, but the texture was deliberately abrasive, designed to annoy and deter. Gently, precisely, he plucked at the first coarse thread. He didn't pull, but persuaded, teasing it loose from its weave with the deftness of a surgeon. A small section of the brilliant red wall flickered, becoming momentarily transparent. He moved to the next, and the next, his movements accelerating into a blur of impossible dexterity. It was like watching a master weaver unmaking a complex tapestry in reverse, his hands a blur of focused motion. One by one, the coarse security threads unspooled, their light dimming as their purpose was undone. The wall, its structural integrity gone, dissolved into a harmless, drifting cloud of motes of light that faded into nothing. He was in. The internal network was a dazzling, disorienting metropolis of its own. Data streams, representing everything from confidential employee emails to live security camera feeds, flowed like highways of liquid light between massive, crystalline structures that were the data servers. It was a world of pure, logical order, beautiful and terrifying in its complexity. His target was the account server, a glowing, golden fortress that pulsed with a steady, rhythmic light at the network's very heart, getting there required stealth. He couldn't just fly straight for it. His unauthorized signature, his emerald green thread, would stick out like a flare in this sea of corporate red and gold. So he adapted. He located a slow-moving, low-priority data stream, a janitorial drone's hourly maintenance report, a sluggish, gray-colored thread, and expertly wove his own signature into its fabric. He became part of the report, his presence masked, his light hidden within the mundane. He drifted through the system, a ghost in the machine, his eyes scanning for the prize. He found it, the main transaction ledger. From here, he could access the holding accounts, the vast pools of digital currency. But it was guarded by something new, something more dangerous. It appeared in his perception as a series of sharp, crystalline barriers that materialized and dematerialized in random patterns, pulsing with an aggressive, predatory energy. An intrusion countermeasures electronics system, an IC. This one felt different from a passive firewall. It wasn't just a wall, it was a hunter. It was watching. Okay, Zero. He whispered to himself in the physical world, a single bead of sweat tracing a slow, deliberate path down his temple and into his eyebrow. Time to be quick. He shed his camouflage, detaching from the janitorial report like a diver leaving a submersible. The moment his unauthorized emerald signature was exposed, the ICE reacted with blinding speed. A razor-sharp shard of corrupted data, glowing with a malevolent purple light, shot towards him. He twisted his consciousness, a reflexive, thought-fast dodge. The attack sliced through the space where he'd been a millisecond before, its passage shredding a nearby stream of cafeteria menu updates into a shower of digital confetti. There was no time for subtlety now. He dove straight for the ledger, a behemoth of shimmering gold data, his hands a blur. He needed to find the right account, a corporate slush fund with enough credits that a small withdrawal, small to them, a fortune to anyone in the Undercity, would go unnoticed for at least a few hours. He plunged his phantom hands into the glittering, golden data of the ledger. The sensory overload was immense. It was like plunging his head into a roaring waterfall of pure information. Account numbers, transaction histories, security tags, timestamps, routing codes, it all flooded his senses, a cacophony of noise in his head. He had to filter it, sort it, find the signal in the noise before the IC could land a hit. Another purple shard screamed past his metaphorical ear. He ignored it. Filter for high balance, low activity, zero oversight flags, he commanded himself. There. A dormant account, labeled simply miscellaneous. Operational expenses. It was overflowing with untraceable credits. Omnigen's pocket money for bribes, black ops, and whatever else they didn't want on the official books. He grabbed the thick, golden thread of the account's core balance and pulled. The IC retaliated instantly, no longer firing shards but sending a massive wave of firewall code that felt like a physical blast of white-hot heat. Back in his apartment, the haptic sensors in the old ergonomic chair vibrated violently, a crude translation of the digital assault, but the mental strain was all his. A sharp, lancing pain shot through his skull, and his vision in the data world flickered at the edges. He gritted his teeth, the muscles in his jaw aching. He had the account. Now for the destination. He pulled a pre-written, carefully prepared thread of code from a pocket of his own system, a thin, unassuming strand of pale blue light. It represented the Tatooine Community Clinic's anonymous donation account. It was a humble little thing, but he'd wrapped it in layers of his best work, triple encrypted and routed through a dozen dead-end servers across the globe, from Neo-Kyoto to the Martian colonies. Untraceable. He had to splice them. Reweave the very fabric of the transaction. He held the thick, powerful, golden Kageyama thread in one hand and the thin, humble, blue clinic thread in the other. He began to weave them together, his fingers moving with a speed and precision that was less a skill and more a part of his very being. It was a frantic, desperate act of creation under fire. The ICE slammed against his hastily constructed personal shields, each impact a jarring blow to his concentration, making the threads tremble in his grasp. Almost there, just a few more knots. He tied the final knot, a complex cryptographic signature that would authorize the transfer and then, like a self-destruct sequence, erase its own origin point from the ledger. The moment the knot was tied, the golden thread flared with brilliant light. A river of credits, a life-saving fortune for the Undercity, diverted its course. It abandoned its stagnant pool and flowed down the new, blue path he had created. Done. With a final, desperate surge of will, he yanked his consciousness back, severing his connection to the Kageyama network in a clean, sharp snap that echoed in the silence of his mind. The world crashed back in on him with the force of a physical blow. The gray faded, and the neon-soaked reality of his cluttered apartment returned with a vengeance. The sounds, the smells, the oppressive humidity, it was all suddenly, violently overwhelming. Izuku gasped, his lungs burning, and slumped back in his chair. His head throbbed with a vicious, pulsing migraine, and the phantom feeling of coarse, scratchy rope and burning heat still lingered on his skin. He ripped the neural interface visor from his head and tossed it onto a pile of cables, his breath coming in ragged, shuddering pants. His hands were shaking, not from fear, but from sheer mental exertion. On his central monitor, a simple, elegant confirmation message glowed in plain text: transaction complete. Receipt logged. Trace deleted. A small, weary, but triumphant smile touched his lips. He'd done it. For one more month, a small, underfunded clinic in the deepest, poorest sector of the Undercity would keep its lights on. For one more month, Dr. Kenji could afford medicine for kids with respiratory illnesses from the smog. For one more month, people who couldn't afford an omni-gen health plan, which was most people, would get the care they needed. It was a drop in the ocean, he knew. A tiny, insignificant act of rebellion against an entity as vast and uncaring as the sea itself. But sometimes, a single drop was enough to prove the tide could turn. An hour later, the roaring migraine had subsided to a dull, persistent ache behind his temples, and the jittery surge of adrenaline had been replaced by a familiar, bone-deep exhaustion. Izuku pulled on a dark gray hoodie, the fabric worn soft from countless washes, and pocketed a small, encrypted data chip no bigger than his thumbnail. It was one thing to move the money digitally. It was another to deliver the access key without leaving a physical or digital trace. He locked his apartment, the door hissing shut on a series of heavy mag bolts he'd installed himself, and descended into the city's maw. The building's elevator smelled of damp metal, stale synth booze, and despair. It opened onto a street-level market teeming with a frantic, desperate kind of life. The air was thick with the steam from yakitori and ramen stalls, the loud chatter of a dozen languages blending into a single urban roar, and the persistent hum of aging technology straining to keep up. People hurried through the rain, their faces illuminated in transient flashes of neon, their expressions ranging from weary resignation to grim defiance. Izuku kept his head down, his hood pulled low to shadow his face, just another anonymous figure in the great, shuffling mass of humanity. He navigated the labyrinthine streets with an ingrained, instinctual familiarity, his path taking him deeper into the Undercity, to the sectors where the colossal holoads flickered and died, and the pristine omnigen drones rarely bothered to patrol. Here, the light came from bare, flickering fluorescent bulbs strung between buildings and the warm, inviting glow from apartment windows. His destination was a small repair shop tucked into a grimy alcove beneath a rumbling mag train overpass. Every few minutes, a train would roar overhead, shaking dust and rust-colored water down onto the street below. The sign above the door was a perfect metaphor for the neighborhood, a piece of hand-painted scrap metal, resilient and resourceful. It read, Uraraka's Upgrades Repairs. A small, stylized cartoon rocket, trailing a plume of smoke, was painted next to it with cheerful determination. He pushed through the door, a small, physical bell chiming his arrival, a sound quaintly anachronistic in this age. The shop was even more cluttered than his apartment, but with a different, more tangible kind of chaos. This was a chaos of physical things. Shelves overflowed with power converters, hydraulic pistons, salvaged cybernetic limbs, and spools of high-grade wiring. The unmistakable, acrid scent of grease, ozone, and ionized metal hung heavy in the air. In the center of the room, a stripped-down courier hoverbike was suspended in a heavy-duty maintenance harness, its guts exposed to the world. A figure in oil-stained brown overalls slid out from under the bike on a wheeled creeper. She pushed a pair of bulky welding goggles up onto her forehead, revealing a round, perpetually cheerful face framed by a short brown bob. A permanent, signature smudge of grease adorned her left cheek, like a warrior's mark. "Deku! You look like death warmed over," Ochako Uraraka said, her voice a welcome note of genuine warmth in the cold, wet night. She sat up and wiped her hands on an already filthy rag, somehow leaving a fresh streak of black on her knuckles. "Let me guess. You were out playing Robin Hood in the wires again." Izuka managed a weak smile. Seeing her always seemed to ground him, pulling him out of the abstract world of data and back into the real one. "Just some light asset reallocation," he said, his voice still a bit hoarse. "For a good cause." Ochako's bright, energetic expression softened with a familiar layer of concern. She was his oldest and closest friend, the only person in the world who knew he was zero. She was his anchor, his boots on the ground, the one who could source a rare power cell or a military-grade heatsink on the black market, and the one who would physically drag him out of his nest to make sure he ate something that wasn't reconstituted nutrient paste. "Kageyama Financial isn't light, Deku," she chided gently, standing up and dusting off her overalls. She took in his pale face, the dark circles under his eyes, and the faint tremor that still lingered in his hands. "That's not some back-alley loan shark. That's an Omni-Gen tentacle. You keep poking the Kraken, and one of these days, it's going to notice you." "It needed poking," he insisted, pulling the small data chip from his pocket. It glinted under the harsh workshop lights. "This is the access key for Dr. Kenji at the clinic. Same protocol as last time. Can you make the drop?" She took the chip, her calloused, capable fingers closing around it. "Of course. I'm heading down to Sector 7 for a parts run anyway. It's on the way." She paused, her gaze serious as she tucked the chip into a secure, zippered pocket. "You're pushing yourself too hard. I know you think you're invincible in there, but that quirk of yours, it takes a toll. I can see it. You get this look, like you're a million miles away." "I'm fine, Ochako." "Really?" He lied, though he knew she could see right through him as easily as he could see through a basic firewall. "It was a clean run. No alarms triggered. I was in and out." "No alarms that you know of," she countered, her voice sharp with worry. She picked up a wrench and tapped it thoughtfully against her palm. "These core, they play the long game. They're not stupid. They'll let a little fish steal a worm just to see which hole it swims back to. They could be logging your signature right now, building a profile, just waiting for you to get cocky." He knew she was right. Her street-smart pragmatism was the perfect, necessary counterbalance to his sometimes reckless idealism. But the image of the clinic, of the old doctor's tired but grateful face, of the children lining up outside its doors, overrode the cold logic of fear. "It's a risk I have to take. No one else is going to help them. Omni-Gen is trying to run them out of business so they can open a pay-per-visit corporate clinic in their place." Ochako sighed, a puff of air that ruffled her bangs. She knew that look in his eyes. It was the same one he got when he saw a stray cat in the rain or an old man who couldn't afford the fare for the mag train. It was a look of fierce, unwavering, and sometimes foolish compassion. It was the most heroic and most dangerous thing about him. "All right, hero," she said, her tone softening. "But you owe me. Next time I need a diagnostic run on a Series G logic board for one of these old bikes, you're not allowed to complain for 20 minutes about how the architecture is a crime against engineering." "It's a deal," he said, a genuine smile finally reaching his eyes. "Thanks, Uraraka. For everything. Just be careful, you big nerd," she said, her voice softening again. "The world needs more people like you." It would be a damn shame if you got yourself erased over a handful of credits. She gave his shoulder a firm, reassuring squeeze, her hand warm and solid through his damp hoodie, before turning back to the disemboweled hoverbike. Izuku watched her for a moment, a wave of profound gratitude washing over him. In a city built on isolation and transactional relationships, their friendship was a rare and precious anomaly. It was real, tangible. Not just threads of light in the dark. He left the comforting, greasy warmth of the shop and walked to a nearby noodle stall, the data chip and the mission now safely in Ochako's capable hands. He ordered a bowl of steaming broth and synthetic protein chunks, and found a relatively dry spot under a leaky awning to eat. As he ate, the warmth of the bowl chasing some of the chill from his bones, his eyes were drawn to a large public news screen mounted on the side of a towering residential block. The screen flickered to life with the crisp, clean, offensively cheerful logo of the Omnigen News Network. A polished anchorwoman with a dazzling white smile and eyes that didn't quite look real was reporting on the corporation's latest civic project. And Omnigen continues its unwavering commitment to a safer, more secure Neo-Muzidafu with today's launch of its landmark Heroic Partnership Initiative. She chirped, her voice smooth and placating. The program will provide state-of-the-art support gear, real-time tactical analysis, and integrated communications to our city's top pro-heroes, ensuring they have every resource they need to keep us safe from villainous and anarchic elements. The screen cut to a live feed of a press conference. It was being held in a pristine, brilliantly lit hall, the kind of place that didn't exist in the Undercity. Standing at a sleek, metallic podium bearing the Omnigen logo, flanked by smug executives in sharp, 1,000-credit suits, was a figure Izuku would have recognized in silhouette. He was a mountain of a man, radiating power and charisma, a giant of muscle and presence even when confined by a tailored suit. Two iconic, golden blonde bangs swept up from his forehead like the horns of a great stag, a symbol known the world over. All Might. The #1 hero. The symbol of peace, or, as the corporate press releases now called him, the symbol of order. It is a new era of cooperation. All Might's legendary voice boomed from the screen's speakers, as powerful and resonant as ever. But to Izuku's ears, it was missing something crucial. It lacked the genuine, booming warmth he remembered from the old video archives of his childhood. This sounded practiced. Rehearsed. With Omnigen's visionary support, we can build a safer, more prosperous future for all citizens of this great city. Together, we can ensure that law and order prevail. Together, we are plus ultra. The executives applauded robotically. The curated crowd of journalists cheered on cue. All Might turned to the cameras and struck a heroic pose, his signature, world-famous smile looking less like a genuine expression of reassurance and more like a registered trademark. A brand logo. Izuku's appetite vanished instantly. He stared at the screen, the half-eaten noodles forgotten in his hands, growing cold. The broth suddenly tasted like ash. He remembered being a small, quirkless, helpless boy, huddled in front of a screen just like this one, watching old videos of All Might. Videos of him saving hundreds of people from a collapsing skyscraper, his uniform tattered and his body bleeding, but his smile unwavering and true. Videos of him talking about self-sacrifice, about how the true measure of a hero was how much they were willing to give of themselves for others, with no expectation of reward. He had been everything Izuku had ever wanted to be. A beacon. Now, that beacon was being used to sell corporate-sponsored security drones and invasive public surveillance software. He was the friendly, trustworthy face of the same monolithic entity that was methodically strangling the life from the Undercity, the same company whose secret slush fund he had just raided to keep a tiny, struggling clinic from going under. A bitter, painful lump formed in Izuku's throat. He lowered his gaze from the screen, the hero's booming voice now sounding hollow and false, an echo of a greater past. The rain continued its steady, indifferent rhythm, washing the fractured neon reflections down the grimy street. He forced himself to finish his noodles, the food tasteless and heavy in his stomach. The small, sharp victory from his hack, the warmth of his success, suddenly felt fragile and insignificant, a single flickering candle in the face of an oncoming hurricane. He was just one person, a ghost hiding in the wires, while they had the money, the infrastructure, the media, and even the heroes on their side. He dropped his empty bowl in a public recycler unit, and pulled his hood up, melting back into the anonymous, rain-soaked crowd. The image of All Might smiling, sponsored face was burned into his mind, a painful icon of his own disillusionment. Even you! Izuku whispered to the uncaring city, his voice a wisp of sound, stolen by the wind and the rain. Even you sold out. He walked back toward his residential block, back to his nest of wires and screens. The profound exhaustion was settling deep into his bones, but beneath it, a familiar, stubborn ember of defiance began to glow hot in his chest. They had their symbol of order, they had their corporate heroes and their gleaming, untouchable towers. But down here, in the dark and the rain, the ghost was still in the machine. The tide had not yet turned, but the first drop had fallen. And he had more work to do. One thread at a time. The day after a deep dive was always the worst. For Izuku, it was a physical and mental hangover, a state of profound depletion that left the world feeling muted and abrasive. His migraine from the Kageyama hack had receded from a roaring fire to a smoldering ember behind his right eye, pulsing in time with his heartbeat. He'd slept for 10 hours, a dead, dreamless sleep, and had woken up feeling as if he'd run a marathon in his mind. He sat at his small kitchen counter, a space carved out between a towering stack of server manuals and a dormant 3D printer, nursing a mug of lukewarm, nutrient-rich sludge that passed for coffee in the Undercity. The rain, a constant companion, pattered against his reinforced windowpane, each drop a tiny, dull impact that seemed to echo inside his skull. Through the glass, Neomusidifu was a watercolor painting left out in the storm, its neon colors bleeding into the oppressive gray. His system was running a low-level diagnostic, the logs scrolling leisurely up his secondary monitor and calming green text. No tripwires, no silent alarms he could detect, no vengeful corporate algorithms sniffing at his digital door. By all accounts, the Kageyama job had been a success. The ghost had passed through, left its mark, and vanished. Yet, a disquieting feeling coiled in his gut, a low-level anxiety that the silence was too perfect. He'd poked a tentacle of the Kraken, as Ochako had said. He couldn't shake the feeling that somewhere in the deep, dark waters of the net, an eye had opened. He spent the morning trying to be normal Izuku, not Zero. He tinkered with a neighbor's malfunctioning comm chip, a simple fix involving resoldering a connection no bigger than a grain of rice. The delicate, physical work was a welcome distraction from the abstract, high-stakes world he'd inhabited the night before. It grounded him, reminded him of the tangible reality he was fighting for. Each tiny, repaired device was a small victory against the tide of corporate-mandated obsolescence, a tiny blow against Omnigen's policy of replace, don't repair. A sharp, frantic buzz from his apartment's intercom shattered the quiet. It wasn't the polite, two-tone chime of a delivery drone or a casual visitor. It was a sustained, panicked burst, the kind someone uses when they're running from something. Izuku's head snapped up, the embers of his migraine flaring. He toggled the external camera feed onto his main screen. The image was grainy, distorted by the rain sheeting down the lens, but the figure huddled in the hallway was unmistakable. Ochako. She had her back pressed against his door, her hoodie pulled up, her face pale and her eyes wide with something that looked a lot like fear. He was at the door in a second, his exhaustion forgotten, replaced by a surge of adrenaline. He unlatched the heavy mag bolts. Ochako? What's wrong? Get in. She practically fell inside, stumbling past him as he quickly sealed the door behind her. She was soaked, her hair plastered to her forehead, and she was breathing heavily, her chest rising and falling in ragged gasps. She wasn't just wet from the rain, she was trembling. Deku! You're not going to believe this! She panted, leaning against the wall to steady herself. In her right hand, she clutched a heavy, waterproof satchel, holding it like it was either a priceless artifact or a live bomb. Are you hurt? Did someone follow you? He asked, his mind immediately jumping to the worst-case scenarios. Kageyama's security. Omnigen enforcers. A rival hacker's muscle. No, I don't think so. I was careful, she said, shaking her head, trying to catch her breath. The drop to Dr. Kenji went fine. He was so grateful, Deku. He said you're a guardian angel, she swallowed hard. After that, I went to see my contact for those high-amperage power cells, down in the Sector 9 med bays. A reproduct named Stitch. He gave me this. She finally seemed to gain her composure, pushing herself off the wall. She walked over to Izuku's main workbench and carefully, almost reverently, unsealed the satchel. The air hissed as the vacuum seal broke. Reaching inside, she pulled out an object wrapped in thick, oil-stained cloth. She unwrapped it with a delicacy that was at odds with her usual bustling energy. Lying on the surface of the workbench was a piece of technology unlike anything Izuku had ever seen up close. It was small, fitting in the palm of her hand, a sleek, crescent-shaped device made of a material that looked like polished, matte black obsidian. It was seamless, with no obvious ports or buttons, but embedded in its surface were hair-thin microfilaments that seemed to absorb the light, glowing faintly with a sickly internal luminescence. At one end, a cluster of biodermal needles, fine as a cat's whisker, glinted menacingly. It was a piece of high-end corporate tech, something that belonged in the pristine laboratories of the Spire, not on a grimy workbench in the Undercity. "What is it?" Izuku asked, his voice a low whisper. He felt an instinctive revulsion, a deep-seated wrongness emanating from the object. "Stitch called it a quirk regulator," Ochako explained, her voice low and serious. "Some desperate kid came to him 2 nights ago, said he bought it off the black market, a next-gen upgrade that was supposed to help him control his volatile emitter quirk. He paid a fortune for it. He activated it, and it nearly killed him." Izuku stared at the device, a cold dread creeping up his spine. "Stitch said the kid went into convulsions. His quirk went haywire, firing in every direction, then just cut out. Stone dead. His heart stopped twice. Stitch managed to stabilize him, and cut this thing out of the base of his skull." Ochako's eyes were dark with the memory. "The kid is alive barely. But his quirk is gone. Completely erased. Stitch said he's never seen anything like it. The device is fried, but he was terrified to have it in his shop. He knew I had a friend who was good with code. He begged me to take it." She pointed to a minuscule, almost invisible etching on the device's obsidian surface. It was the Omnigen logo. Izuku felt a chill that had nothing to do with the apartment's temperature. This wasn't a consumer product. The design was too clean, too invasive, too military. It was a prototype, and it was designed not just to regulate a quirk, but to control it, and if necessary, to extinguish it. The implications were horrifying. "They're testing this on people," Izuku breathed, his analytical mind kicking into high gear despite his revulsion. "Using the Undercity as a private, unregulated laboratory. Worse," Ochako said grimly. "Stitch said the kid who bought it was a low-level dealer. He said the guy he got it from whispered that it was leaked tech, part of a new top-secret hero support program." Izuku's blood ran cold. He thought of the news broadcast. All Might, smiling and endorsing Omnigen's heroic partnership initiative. Was this what that partnership entailed? Weapons that could neutralize a person's quirk permanently? A tool of ultimate control, disguised as support? He had to know. "I need to look inside," he said, his voice firm. The weariness, the migraine, it was all gone, burned away by a sudden, fierce urgency. "I need to see the code." Ochako looked at him, her face etched with worry. "Deku, you just did a major hack. You're exhausted. And this thing, it feels dangerous. Stitch said it felt wrong just holding it. That's why I have to," he insisted, his gaze fixed on the malevolent black crescent. "If Omnigen is developing this, the world needs to know. I'll be careful." She hesitated for a long moment, then gave a slow, reluctant nod. "Okay. But if you start screaming, I'm pulling the plug." Literally. He gave her a grateful look and turned to his console. This was different from hacking a network. This was a direct, physical interface. He retrieved a set of microprobes and a diagnostic cradle from a drawer. With the focused precision of a surgeon, he placed the Omnigen device into the cradle and began attaching the probes to the barely visible connection points hidden among the microfilaments. "Okay," he said, taking a deep breath and settling into his chair. He slipped his neural interface visor back on. "Keep an eye on my vitals." He closed his eyes. The familiar gray void enveloped him. He focused his will, not on the vast web of the city, but on the tiny, localized network contained within the device in the cradle. He reached out with his data weave, his emerald thread of consciousness probing for the device's core. The moment he made contact, he recoiled. It was like touching a tumor. The data structure wasn't clean and ordered like the Kageyama network. It was a chaotic, malignant mass. In his perception, it manifested as a sphere of blackened, corrupted crystal, pulsing with a faint, sickly purple light. The core programming was a tangled, indecipherable knot at its center, but worse were the layers of security around it. They weren't walls or locks. They were organic, predatory. Thick, thorny vines of black code wrapped around the core, bristling with defensive subroutines that looked like jagged barbs. It was a system designed not just to protect data, but to punish intruders. "Ochako," he said aloud, his voice strained. "The encryption it's biological. It's designed to actively fight back. Can you get through it?" she asked, her voice tight with tension. "I don't know," he admitted. The sheer hostility of the code was making the pressure behind his eye throb again. "It's unlike anything I've ever seen. But it's damaged." The malfunction that fried the device also fractured some of the outer security layers. I see cracks. He saw them as literal fissures in the crystalline surface, leaking corrupted data like black smoke. It was his only way in. Taking a steadying mental breath, he pushed his consciousness through one of the cracks. The inside was a nightmare. He was in a labyrinth of decaying code and shrieking error messages, parasitic subroutines, which appeared as writhing, worm-like threads of code, latched onto his signature, trying to drain his focus. He swatted them away, pushing deeper toward the core, towards the source code that controlled the device's function. He fought his way through layers of what he could only describe as digital scar tissue, the remnants of the catastrophic malfunction. The device hadn't just broken, it had torn itself apart from the inside out. He finally breached the last corrupted layer, and laid his senses on the core programming. And it laid its senses on him. It was a trap. A dead man's switch. The moment his unauthorized signature touched the core, a hidden security protocol activated. It wasn't a wall, it wasn't a shard of data. It was a feedback loop, a digital scream of pure, weaponized energy directed straight back through the connection, straight into his mind. In the physical world, Izuku's body went rigid. A strangled cry escaped his lips. His back arched in the chair, his hands clenching into fists. On the diagnostic monitor, his heart rate spiked into the red. "Deku!" Ochako yelled, lunging for the console's power strip. In the data world, Izuku's perception was consumed by a tidal wave of white noise and blinding agony. It felt like an electric shock to his very soul, a jolt of pure, malicious data scorching his neural pathways. The elegant tapestry of his data weave was being ripped to shreds. He felt a tearing sensation, as if the core of his quirk was being clawed at by the device's dying ghost. He had to get out. But his will was paralyzed by the assault. The pain was absolute, a digital fire burning away his consciousness. But in the heart of that fire, a single, defiant thought burned hotter. "I can't leave with nothing." He was Izuku Midoriya. He was zero. He didn't run. With a primal scream that was both mental and physical, he rallied the last vestiges of his focus. He couldn't fight the feedback loop, but maybe, just maybe, he could grab one tiny piece of the wreckage before it consumed him. He thrust a single, desperate thread of his consciousness, a thread of pure, stubborn will, into the chaotic, fragmenting core data. He grabbed something. A single, corrupted data packet. He didn't know what it was, but he latched onto it, wrapping his own code around it, shielding it as the digital storm raged around him. And then he pulled. He ripped his consciousness back with a violence that dwarfed his escape from Kageyama. The connection severed. Izuku gasped, his eyes flying open behind the visor. He slumped forward, his body trembling uncontrollably, a low moan of pain escaping his lips. He tore the visor off his head and it clattered to the floor. The world swam back into focus, a blurry, nauseating mess. The smell of ozone was thick in the air, a sign that the feedback loop had been powerful enough to arc electricity from the cradle itself. "Deku! Are you okay? Talk to me!" Ochako was by his side, her hands hovering over his shoulders, afraid to touch him. I'm here," he managed to choke out, his throat raw. His head felt like it had been split open with an axe. He leaned over, bracing himself on his knees, fighting a wave of vertigo. The device, it's dead now. Completely inert. The trap fried what was left of it. To hell with the device, what about you? She demanded, her voice shaking with a mixture of anger and relief. I'm fine. He lied, though it was the least convincing lie he'd ever told. He pushed himself upright, his visions slowly clearing. But I got something. One packet. It's all I could grab. He turned to his main monitor, his hands shaking as he typed a series of commands. He initiated a quarantine protocol, isolating the data fragment he'd pulled into a secure virtual machine, a digital clean room where it couldn't infect the rest of his system. Then, with bated breath, he ran the decryption. The corrupted file slowly unscrolled on the screen. Most of it was garbage data, a meaningless jumble of characters and symbols, the digital shrapnel of the device's self-destruction. But some of it was intact. What he saw made the last dregs of color drain from his face. It was a log file. A test subject's log. It was a stream of cold, clinical biometric data. Heart rate, spiking from a resting 75 to an impossible 280 beats per minute. Neural activity, showing extreme pain and terror, before flatlining into a void. And a quirk energy signature reading, a complex waveform that fluctuated wildly, violently, before shrinking, sputtering, and extinguishing into a flat, dead line. It was the digital ghost of a person being tortured to death by technology. The last, horrifying moments of a failed experiment. Izuku felt sick. This wasn't a product. It was a weapon. A torture device. And below the horrifying biometric data, at the very bottom of the corrupted file, was one last, intact line of text. A project header, stark and clear against the chaos of the garbled code. Testing log, subject 009. Project designation, Chimera. Chimera. The word hung in the air, radiating a cold, profound menace. In ancient myths, a chimera was a monstrous creature, a grotesque hybrid of different animals. A lion, a goat, a serpent, all fused into one unnatural being. What was Omnigen creating? Before Izuku could even begin to process the implications, a high-priority alert flashed in the corner of his monitor. It was an alert from one of his deepest, most sensitive watchdog programs, a silent little spy he planted in the public network infrastructure that monitored high-level corporate data traffic. The alert was simple: massive data surge detected. Origin, Omnigen Spire, executive level. Destination, encrypted. High-priority bounty protocol initiated. Izuku's blood ran cold. His intrusion, his desperate, violent smash and grab of that data packet, hadn't been as clean as he thought. His fight with the device's dying security system had been loud. Very, very loud. He hadn't just tripped a silent alarm. He'd set off a screaming, system-wide klaxon in the heart of Omnigen itself. High in the spire, the rain didn't even touch the windows of the CEO's office. The view from the 250th floor was one of sublime, untouchable power. The smog layer that choked the undercity was a picturesque sea of gray clouds below, pierced only by the tips of other corporate towers. The city below wasn't a place of people, it was a map. A resource. A problem to be managed. The office was a testament to sterile, minimalist wealth. The floor was polished white marble. The walls were smart glass that could display data or become opaque at a whim. The only furniture was a massive obsidian desk that looked like it had been carved from a meteor, and two severe-looking chairs. Behind the desk sat Kenshin Yagami, the CEO of Omnigen Corporation. He was a man in his late 50s, with sharp, intelligent features, and silver-gray hair swept back from his temples with severe precision. He wore an impeccably tailored dark gray suit that probably cost more than Izuku's entire apartment building. He was observing a holographic projection of the Omnigen stock price with the calm, detached interest of a biologist observing a cell culture. The door to his office chimed, a soft, deferential sound. "Enter," Yagami said, his voice quiet but carrying an unmistakable weight of absolute authority. He didn't look up from the hologram. A man in a crisp, dark uniform entered. This was Saito, Yagami's chief of security. He was a man accustomed to power, but in Yagami's presence, he radiated an almost palpable nervousness. He stood at attention before the desk, his hands clasped behind his back. "Sir," Saito began, his voice tight. "There has been an incident." Yagami's eyes flickered from the stock prices to Sato's face. He waved a hand, and the hologram vanished. "An incident is a vague and therefore useless word, Saito. Report. At 14:07 hours, a Level 5 security protocol was triggered from a dormant asset," Saito said, choosing his words with extreme care. "Prototype Regulator Unit 734, the one that was misplaced from RD last week." Yagami's expression didn't change, but a dangerous stillness settled over him. "Misplaced," he repeated, the single word dripping with ice. "Continue." "The unit's dead man's switch was activated by an external intrusion. A forced data extraction," Saito explained, sweating slightly despite the room's cool temperature. "The intrusion was brutal, not sophisticated, but incredibly forceful. It tore through the damaged outer layers and triggered the core feedback loop. The unit is now a brick, but sir, the feedback loop recorded the intruder's signature before it burned out. And it registered a successful, albeit partial, data extraction. A corrupted fragment was taken." Yagami finally leaned back in his chair, steepling his long fingers under his chin. He was silent for a full 10 seconds, his dark eyes fixed on some point in the middle distance. Saito did not dare breathe. "A fragment," Yagami said at last, his voice deceptively soft. "A fragment containing what, precisely? We can't be certain, sir. The logs from the unit are too corrupted. But based on the file's location in the core, there is a high probability that the intruder now has access to the project designation." Yagami's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Chimera. The name of his legacy project. The key to the future of warfare, of heroism, of control. A name that could not, under any circumstances, be allowed to see the light of day. "Not yet. This intruder," Yagami said, his voice losing its softness and taking on a hard, metallic edge. "This anomaly. What do we know about their signature?" "It's new, sir. We've never encountered it. Raw power, but unrefined. Intuitive. Almost organic. It's like nothing our analysts have seen before. They're calling it a ghost. A zero in the system." "A zero," Yagami mused, a flicker of something that might have been contempt in his eyes. "In mathematics, a zero is a placeholder for nothing. It seems we have a piece of nothing that thinks it is something. This cannot be tolerated. Any disruption, no matter how small, is a threat to order. And threats must be eliminated. Swiftly. Quietly, he looked at Saito, his gaze sharp enough to cut glass. "I will not have our internal security, our assets, chasing this ghost through the slums of the net. That is inefficient. It is messy. We require a scalpel, not a sledgehammer. We need a specialist." Saito understood immediately. "You want to post a black market bounty?" "Precisely," Yagami said, a thin, cruel smile touching his lips for the first time. "An anonymous contract. Maximum payout. No questions asked? I want this zero found, identified, and scrubbed from existence. I want their hardware turned to slag, their data to dust, and their name forgotten. I want this handled with extreme prejudice. Hire the best, the most aggressive, the most ruthless, the most effective mercenary on the market." Saito nodded, a grim understanding on his face. He knew exactly who the CEO meant. There was only one hacker for hire with that kind of reputation. A digital demolition artist. A scorched earth prodigy who took a sadistic pleasure in not just defeating his opponents, but utterly annihilating them. "I know who to call, sir," Saito said. "Good," Yagami replied, turning his attention back to the empty space where his stock market hologram had been, his dismissal absolute. "See to it." Saito gave a crisp bow and exited the office, the door hissing shut behind him. He walked down the silent, white corridor and pulled out a secure, encrypted comlink. He accessed a hidden, dark web server and initiated a new contract, uploading the faint, fragmented traces of the intruder's emerald green signature. He set the payout to a figure with enough zeros to make a lesser man faint. And in the field for the designated contractor, he typed in a single, infamous handle. A name that was a promise of explosive, overwhelming violence. Ground Zero. The silence was the most unsettling part. 2 days had passed since the violent encounter with the Chimera device. 2 days of Izuku running every diagnostic he could think of, scrubbing his systems for any trace of a tracker, and poring over the single, terrifying word he'd managed to steal from Omnigen's grasp: Chimera. The word had become an obsession, a dark star around which his thoughts now orbited. He spent hours cross-referencing it against every public and dark web database he could access. He found nothing. No leaks, no rumors, no whispers in the hidden corners of the net. It was as if the project didn't exist. Omnigen's data security was legendary, a digital fortress built on a mountain of credits and staffed by the best minds they could buy. The fact that the name was so clean was, in itself, terrifying. It meant this wasn't just a secret. It was a black hole, sucking all information into it. He sat in his nest, the glow of his monitors painting his face in stark, shifting colors. The migraine from the feedback loop had finally faded, but it had left behind a phantom ache, a ghost of the pain that served as a constant reminder of the stakes. He felt like he was standing on the edge of a cliff in the dark, knowing there was a sheer drop below but unable to see how far it went. Anything? Ochako's voice crackled through his comms. She was holed up in her workshop, too nervous to leave while the metaphorical heat was on. They had agreed to communicate only through encrypted, short burst channels until they knew they were in the clear. Nothing, Izuku replied, his voice flat with frustration. He ran a hand through his already messy hair. It's like trying to find a specific grain of sand in a desert with no sun. Every official record, every personnel file, every project list I can access has been scrubbed. It's not just deleted, it's like it was never there. The only way to find out what Chimera is to go deeper. Deeper? Ochako's apprehension was audible even through the digital filter. Deku, you almost got your brain fried 2 days ago. Deeper sounds like a really bad idea right now. It's the only idea I have, he countered, his eyes scanning a schematic of Omnigen's public network architecture. Their main servers are untouchable. Hitting the Spire directly is suicide, but they have to have off-site archives, data hubs for older projects. Less secure, maybe overlooked. If I can find one of those, I might be able to find an unredacted file, a ghost of the project before they buried it so deep. He found a potential target, a low-security data hub listed in the public infrastructure logs as Substation 7G. Officially, it was a redundant weather monitoring station, located in an old, industrial sector of the city. Unofficially, Izuku's gut screamed that it was more. Its data traffic was too high, its encryption protocols too robust for a simple weather station. It was hiding something. I'm going in, he said, his decision made. Deku, wait, let's think about this. Ochako started, but he was already in the zone. I'll be careful, he promised, though the words felt flimsy even to him. Just a quick look. In and out. I'm not going to touch anything, just scan the directory. A ghost, remember? He put on his visor, the familiar weight a strange comfort. He took a deep breath, pushing aside the lingering fear and the phantom pain, and closed his eyes. The world dissolved into the shimmering, incandescent tapestry of the data weave. He located the data stream for Substation 7G. It was a modest, silver-blue thread compared to the crimson artery of Kageyama Financial, but it hummed with a deceptive energy. He wrapped his emerald signature around it and began his approach. The journey through the net was smooth, uneventful. Too uneventful. The knot of anxiety in his stomach tightened. This felt wrong. Too easy. He reached the station's gateway. The firewall was a simple, lattice-like structure of blue light, a standard corporate model from 5 years ago. It was almost insulting in its simplicity. A child could bypass it. This was a trap. The realization hit him with the force of a physical blow, a split second before the world exploded. He didn't see the attack coming. There was no warning, no telltale energy buildup. One moment he was observing the firewall, the next, his senses were consumed by a cataclysmic digital detonation. An invisible tripwire had been waiting for him, and his approach had triggered it. The attack wasn't a probe or a shard of data. It was pure, unadulterated chaotic force. In his perception, it was like a series of demolition charges going off simultaneously. The simple blue firewall didn't just resist, it detonated, sending a shockwave of shrapnel-like data spikes and corrupted code tearing through his defenses. He was thrown back, his consciousness reeling from the concussive force. His personal shields, the ones he'd woven from his own code, shattered like glass. The assault was brutal, aggressive, and utterly contemptuous of finesse. It wasn't designed to block or capture him. It was designed to annihilate him. Back in his apartment, Izuku cried out, his body jolting in the chair. The haptic feedback systems went wild, vibrating with such intensity that the old chair rattled on the floor. Red warning lights flashed across his secondary monitor. System integrity compromised. Multiple intrusions detected. Firewall breached at 17 points. Deku! What's happening? Ochako's frantic voice shouted from the comms. Ambush! He gasped, gritting his teeth against the sensory assault. He was fighting on instinct now, his mind struggling to process the sheer violence of the attack. He could feel the intruder in his system. Their signature wasn't a clean thread like his own. It was a jagged, burning, explosive orange, like crackling embers and raw, untamed energy. This wasn't a corporate security system. This was another hacker. A very, very good one. And a very, very angry one. The battle for his system became a desperate, frantic war. Izuku's data weave was a flurry of precise, intricate work as he tried to patch the holes being blown in his defenses. He wove new shields, rerouted corrupted data, and tried to quarantine the invading code. It was like trying to patch a dam with sewing thread while someone else was blasting it with a cannon. For every wall he rebuilt, the attacker would simply smash through it with another explosive burst of code. Their style was the polar opposite of his own. Where he was a weaver, they were a demolitions expert. Where he was water, flowing around obstacles, they were fire, consuming everything in their path. A series of smaller, targeted explosions rocked his core processors. He could feel his own system groaning under the strain, the carefully balanced architecture threatening to collapse. He was losing. He was being completely and utterly outmatched in raw power. Then, a new element entered the fray. A comms channel was forced open, bypassing all his protocols. A voice, distorted by a heavy-duty scrambler into a low, menacing growl, filled his head. You call that hacking? Pathetic. The voice was dripping with arrogance and disdain. It was the voice of a predator toying with its food, hiding behind your little proxy servers, thinking you're a ghost. You're not a ghost. You're just a bug. And I'm the exterminator. Another massive explosion of code ripped through his last major defensive wall, leaving his core command structure exposed. The orange, fiery signature of the attacker coiled around his own emerald thread, squeezing, a predator constricting its prey. Izuku frantically tried to push back, but it was like trying to push back a bonfire. The heat from the attacker's code was immense, causing a fresh wave of pain to lance through his head. He was trapped, cornered in his own system. The distorted voice laughed, a grating, ugly sound. Is this all you've got? I thought I'd at least get a workout. This is just sad. You're nothing. A useless nobody, playing in the big leagues. The voice paused, and the digital pressure intensified. You're just a useless. Deku. Time stopped. The digital world, the pain, the explosions, the frantic struggle for survival, it all faded into the background. Only that one word remained. Deku. It wasn't just the word. It was the specific cadence. The sneering, venomous way it was spat out. It was a sound that was burned into his memory, a ghost that had haunted him his entire life. He'd heard that exact taunt 1,000 times. In school hallways. On playgrounds. In his nightmares. He knew that voice. Even through the heavy distortion, he knew it. There was only one person in the world who said his childhood nickname with that much pure, unadulterated contempt. Kaken. The realization was a jolt of ice water, colder and more shocking than any digital attack. His rival. His childhood friend. His tormentor. Katsuki Bakugo. Here. Now. Hunting him. The shock gave way to a sudden, terrifying clarity. Of course. Of course Omni-Gen would hire him. Bakugo, under the alias Ground Zero, was a legend in the mercenary world. A prodigy who had burst onto the scene a few years ago, famous for his explosive, overwhelming style and his perfect success rate. He didn't just complete contracts, he obliterated targets, leaving nothing but digital wreckage behind. He was the scalpel Yagami had ordered. A scalpel wielded like a warhammer. The knowledge of who he was fighting changed everything. This wasn't an anonymous corporate enforcer. This was personal. This was a rivalry that had defined his entire life, now playing out on a new, infinitely more dangerous battlefield. And that knowledge gave him an edge. He knew Bakugo. He knew his arrogance, his pride, his overwhelming self-confidence. Bakugo wouldn't just beat him. He would want to dominate him, to rub his face in the dirt, to make him understand his own inferiority. He would be expecting Izuku to break, to panic, to surrender. He wouldn't be expecting him to use that arrogance as a weapon. With a surge of desperate resolve, Izuku stopped fighting back directly. He stopped trying to patch the holes. Instead, he did something incredibly risky, something Bakugo would never anticipate. He opened his system further. He took the full, unrestrained force of Bakugo's next attack and didn't try to block it. He let the explosive orange code flood into a non-critical sector of his system, a honeypot he designed for just such an emergency. It was a digital dead end, filled with looping, nonsensical data. What? Giving up? Bakugo's voice sneered, sensing victory. But Izuku wasn't giving up. He was redirecting. As Bakugo's code poured into the honeypot, Izuku used his data weave with a speed and precision he never before achieved. He wasn't building a wall, he was building a mirror. A complex, recursive loop of code designed to take an input and feed it back on itself, amplifying it with every cycle. A feedback loop. It was the same trick he'd used to escape bullies in the schoolyard. Let their own momentum carry them past him until they tripped over their own feet. He let Bakugo pour more and more power into the trap, feeding the beast. The strain on his system was immense. The feedback loop began to glow with a terrifying, unstable white light. It was a bomb of his own making, and he was standing right next to it. What is this? What are you doing, you damn nerd? Bakugo's voice was no longer arrogant. For the first time, there was a hint of confusion, of alarm. He felt the trap closing. He tried to pull his code back, but it was too late. He'd overcommit. It's called thinking. Izuku whispered in the real world, his fingers flying across his keyboard, stabilizing the loop for one final, critical second. Then, he triggered it. He collapsed the loop. The result was a focused, directed explosion. Bakugo's own power, amplified tenfold, fired straight back down the pipeline from which it came. The effect was instantaneous. The fiery orange signature in his system vanished in a silent, violent flash of light, as if it had been snuffed out by a hurricane. The pressure on his mind vanished. The assault stopped. On his monitor, a single line of text appeared. Hostile connection severed at source. He'd done it. He'd survived. He slumped in his chair, gasping for air, his body trembling with the aftershocks of the battle. He was drenched in sweat, his heart hammering against his ribs. The comms were filled with Ochako's panicked voice. Deku! Deku, answer me! What happened? I'm here, he managed to say, his voice weak but steady. I'm okay. Okay? You're okay? My console showed your entire system almost went into catastrophic meltdown, she yelled, her fear now transmuting into furious relief. Who was that? What was that? Izuku leaned his head back, staring at the ceiling of his cluttered apartment. The implications of what had just happened began to settle in, heavy and cold. It was him, he said softly. Him who? Who's him? Bakugo, Izuku breathed. Katsuki Bakugo. Omnigen hired Ground Zero. There was a long, stunned silence on the other end of the comm line. Ochako knew the stories. She knew all about his history with Bakugo. Oh gods, she finally whispered. Deku, this changes everything. This isn't just a corporate hack anymore. This is him. You can't do this alone. Not against a corporation and him. He'll never stop. You know he won't. She was right. He knew it with a certainty that chilled him to the bone. He had won this battle, but only by the skin of his teeth, and only by exploiting Bakugo's personality. Bakugo wouldn't make the same mistake twice. He would come back harder, angrier, and more determined than ever. His pride had been wounded, and a wounded Bakugo was the most dangerous creature Izuku knew. He had exposed a corporate conspiracy, made an enemy of the most powerful entity in Neomuzurifu, and now, he had a personal vendetta with the most dangerous mercenary hacker on the planet. He was out of his league, a small-time ghost caught in a war between titans. He looked around his apartment, at the scavenged tech and the instant noodle cups. This nest, his sanctuary, was no longer safe. He was a target. And he was utterly, terrifyingly alone. Ochako's words echoed in his mind. You can't do this alone. She was right. The realization settled in not as a defeat, but as a simple, undeniable truth. Poking the kraken was one thing. Trying to fight it head-on with a stick was suicide. He needed more than just his own skill. He needed more than Ochako's help with hardware. He needed knowledge. He needed experience. He needed a mentor. An image flashed in his mind unbidden. The image from the news broadcast. The towering figure at the podium, his smile a corporate logo. All Might. The symbol of order. Izuku felt a surge of the old, familiar bitterness. The hero who had sold out. The man who was now a mouthpiece for the very evil he was trying to fight. But then, another thought followed, a whisper of an old obsession, a fragment of his encyclopedic knowledge of hero history. Before Omnigen, before the sponsorships and the commercialization of heroism, All Might had been something else. He had been the symbol of peace. He had fought against unchecked corporate power in the early days, before the system was so thoroughly co-opted. He was a relic from a different time, a time when heroes were champions of the people, not corporate assets. What had happened to that man? Where did he go? And then came the whisper of a legend, a ghost story from the deepest, oldest archives of the net. Rumors of a legendary figure from the dawn of the digital age, a hacktivist who fought the corporations before pro-heroes became their poster boys. A mentor figure who had inspired a generation of digital rebels before he simply vanished. A figure known only by one name, the symbol. Could they be one and the same? Could the old, true All Might, the symbol of peace, have also been this legendary hacker, the symbol? It seemed impossible. A flight of fancy born from desperation. But desperation was all he had left. If he was going to survive, if he was going to have any chance of exposing Project Chimera and fighting back against Omnigen and Bakugo, he needed help. He needed a legend. And if there was even a 1 in a billion chance that the greatest hero in history was also the greatest hacktivist in history, it was a chance he had to take. He had to find All Might. Not the corporate shill on the news screens, but the man behind the smile. The ghost behind the symbol. Ochako, he said, his voice quiet but filled with a new, fragile resolve. I have an idea. It's crazy. It's probably impossible. But it's the only one I've got. He began to type, his fingers moving with renewed purpose. He wasn't searching for Omnigen anymore. He was digging into the past, into archived news reports, old fan forums, and redacted public records. He was hunting for a ghost of a different kind. He was looking for a hero. The hunt for a ghost is a delicate art. The hunt for a legend is a fool's errand. Izuku Midoriya was now engaged in both. The days following his violent confrontation with Bakugo were a blur of paranoia and obsessive research. He abandoned his mission to uncover Project Chimera, placing it on a heavily encrypted, backburnered server. Survival had to come first. He couldn't fight a war if he was already a casualty. Every shadow in the hallway outside his door was a potential Omnigen goon, every flicker of his building's notoriously unreliable power grid a sign of Bakugo's imminent, explosive return. He slept in 4-hour shifts, his comlink to Ochako always open, his own systems locked down behind a new, hastily constructed labyrinth of firewalls and misdirection protocols he named Kakenproof, a small act of defiance that made him feel marginally better. His waking hours were spent diving headfirst into the digital abyss, chasing the faintest whispers of two legendary figures who, in his desperate mind, had begun to merge into one. All Might, the symbol of peace, and the symbol, the mythical hacktivist. The task was monumental. All Might's public history was a carefully curated masterpiece of corporate public relations, a mountain of polished interviews, heroic action reels, and sanitized biographies. Finding the real man, Toshinori Yagi, inside that mountain was like trying to find a single, specific photograph in a landfill of glossy magazines. The digital ghost of the symbol was even more elusive. It was a name spoken only in the oldest, dustiest corners of the net, on defunct message boards from the pre-Spire era, in the fragmented logs of long-dead hacktivist groups, in the footnotes of academic papers on early cybercrime. The symbol was a legend, a folk hero from a time when the net was a wilder, more idealistic frontier. They were credited with derailing the hostile takeover of a beloved public utility, leaking the unethical research of a dozen corporations, and creating the first truly open-source encryption software that, for a brief, shining moment, had democratized digital privacy. And then, about a decade ago, they had simply vanished. Wiped from the net as cleanly as a professional data scrub. The timing was interesting. It was right around the time Omnigen solidified its power, right around the time pro-heroes went from being public servants to branded assets. And most chillingly, it was right around the time of All Might's infamous, vaguely reported career-defining battle against a villain that the media had only ever referred to as Toxic Chainsaw. The details were sealed, a matter of national security, but it was after that fight that All Might's public appearances became more sporadic, more managed. It was the fight that had supposedly left him with a permanent, debilitating injury. Could the two events be connected? Was Toxic Chainsaw a fiction, a cover story for something else? Something corporate? Izuku's fingers flew across his keyboard, a frantic, desperate dance. He wasn't just searching, he was weaving, using his quirk to feel the faint, residual traces of old data, the echoes left behind in the static of the net. He followed dead links, resurrected cached websites from digital graveyards, and pieced together fragmented data packets like a digital archaeologist. He found his first real clue in the server archives of a defunct undercity newspaper, the Neo-Muzudafu Chronicle. It was a single, corrupted photo from 12 years ago, attached to a half-deleted article about a fire at an Omnigen research outpost. The photo showed a blurry, chaotic scene of smoke and emergency crews, but in the background, almost lost in the grain, was a figure. A tall, impossibly broad-shouldered man in civilian clothes, his face obscured by shadow, helping a firefighter pull a civilian from the wreckage. Even in the poor quality, the silhouette was unmistakable. It was All Might, before the world knew him by that name, when he was still just a rising star. But that wasn't the clue. The clue was in the photo's metadata. A single, embedded geotag, unredacted, probably overlooked in the chaos. A location. Not the location of the fire, but where the photo had been uploaded from. It was a comms tower in Sector 13, a forgotten, dilapidated industrial zone on the far edge of the Undercity. A place no one went unless they had to. A digital dead zone. It was a long shot. A wild, desperate gamble based on a single, 12-year-old data point. But it was the only lead he had. "Ochako," he said into his comms, his voice raspy from lack of sleep and too much nutrient sludge. "I think I found something. Something that's not going to get you killed?" She shot back, her voice a mix of hope and exhaustion. "No promises," he admitted. "It's a location. Sector 13. I have to go check it out." "Sector 13? Deku, that place is a graveyard. The infrastructure is crumbling, the gangs use it for scrap wars. It's not safe." "Nowhere is safe for me right now," he countered grimly. "At least there, I'll be off the main grid. Harder to track. I have to see this through. This is the only path I see forward." He could practically hear her sigh of resignation through the calm. "Fine. But you're taking my bike. And my jacket. It has reinforced plating. And a personal distress beacon, if you press this button," she said, and he could picture her tapping a spot on her own sleeve. "It sends a high-frequency burst directly to my workshop comms. No questions asked, I'm coming. Deal?" A warmth spread through Izuku's chest, a welcome antidote to the cold dread that had been his constant companion. "Deal," he said. "Thanks, Ochako." An hour later, Izuku was anonymous. He wore Ochako's heavy-duty courier jacket, the collar pulled up high, and a dark helmet with a polarized visor that obscured his entire face. He straddled her souped-up hoverbike, its engine humming a low, powerful thrum that vibrated through his entire body. It was a beast of a machine, stripped down for speed and maneuverability, its chassis scarred with the evidence of 100 near misses in the crowded undercity skylanes. He gunned the engine and shot out into the perpetual twilight of the lower levels. He stayed low, navigating the labyrinth of crumbling buildings and elevated mag train tracks, a ghost of a different kind now, a physical one. The further he traveled from the city center, the more the world decayed. The neon lights vanished, replaced by the flickering, unreliable glow of sodium lamps. The Omnigen drones were absent here. This was a forgotten place, left to rot. Sector 13 was even worse than Ochako had described. It was a rust-belt nightmare, a sprawling necropolis of abandoned factories and decaying smokestacks that clawed at the smoggy sky like skeletal fingers. The air was thick with the smell of rust, chemical waste, and decay. The only sounds were the wind whistling through broken windows and the distant, percussive clang of metal on metal, scrappers, or worse. He killed the bike's engine a few blocks from the coordinates, hiding it in the shell of a derelict transport truck. The silence that descended was absolute and unnerving. He proceeded on foot, his boots crunching on broken pavement and shattered glass. He clutched a data pad, its screen displaying a map that led him toward the old comms tower. It stood in the center of a fenced-off maintenance yard, a skeletal finger of rust and steel pointing accusingly at the sky. The gate was chained, but the links were so corroded that a single, hard kick from his steel-toed boot was enough to shatter them. He slipped inside the yard, his senses on high alert. The building at the base of the tower was a simple, concrete blockhouse, its windows boarded up, its metal doors scarred with graffiti and rust. It looked abandoned, desolate. For a moment, his heart sank. He had come all this way on a wild goose chase. This was just another dead end. But then, he noticed it. A single, thin, black cable, far newer than anything else in the vicinity, snaking from a junction box on the tower down to a small, almost invisible hole drilled in the concrete wall of the blockhouse. It was a fiber optic line. Someone was drawing power and data from the old tower. His heart began to hammer against his ribs. He approached the door. There was no handle, no lock he could pick. It was a solid slab of steel. He ran his hand over its surface and found what he was looking for, a small, flush-mounted keypad, its surface worn smooth with use. This was it. A test. He pulled out his datapad and a set of interface clips. He didn't have to hack the lock, he just had to talk to it. He clipped onto the keypad's data port, put on his visor, and closed his eyes. The lock's security was elegant. Ancient by modern standards, but beautifully crafted. It was a riddle, a logic puzzle written in a dialect of code he hadn't seen outside of a museum archive. It was the digital equivalent of a forgotten language. A language he'd only ever read about in the legends of the symbol. Speak, friend, and enter, the code seemed to whisper. It was asking for a password, but also a key. A specific cryptographic signature. He didn't have it. He couldn't force it. The system was designed to wipe itself if it detected a brute force attack. He had to solve the riddle. He studied the code, his data weave allowing him to perceive its structure, its flow. It was a question, disguised as a security protocol. It asked about balance, about sacrifice, about the true cost of power. It was a philosophical test. He thought about his journey. About Zero. About why he started this fight. He thought about the clinic, about the people in the Undercity, about the cold, corporate greed of Omnigen. He thought about heroism, the real kind, the kind that didn't come with a sponsorship deal. With trembling, phantom fingers, he began to weave his answer. He didn't write a password. He wrote a manifesto, a short, elegant piece of code that was both an answer to the riddle and a declaration of his own intent. He poured his own ideology, his own desperate hope, into the code. He spoke of protecting the powerless, of holding the powerful accountable, of being a symbol not of order, but of hope. He finished his code and sent it. For a long, heart-stopping moment, nothing happened. He had failed. He had come all this way for nothing. Then, he heard a soft click. A deep, resonant thud echoed from within the blockhouse as a heavy magnetic lock disengaged. The massive steel door swung inward an inch, silent as a grave. He had passed the test. He took a deep breath, the acrid air of Sector 13 filling his lungs, and pushed the door open. He stepped inside, into the darkness. The door swung shut behind him with another heavy thud, plunging him into absolute blackness. He fumbled for the light on his datapad, its weak beam cutting a pathetic swathe through the gloom. The air inside was stale, but clean, a stark contrast to the chemical stench outside. The beam revealed a room that was Spartan, but functional. It was a small, self-contained living space. A simple cot was pushed against one wall, a neatly folded blanket on top. A small table and a single chair sat in the center of the room. A hot plate and a small, humming refrigerator occupied one corner. It was the humble, monastic dwelling of someone who had deliberately cut themselves off from the world. And against the far wall, a sight that made Izuku's breath catch in his throat. It was a bank of computer equipment. Unlike his own chaotic, scavenged nest, this setup was a masterpiece of old-school engineering. The monitors were ancient CRT models, but they were pristine. The servers were custom-built, their casing a heavy, military-grade metal. It was a system built for durability and power, not for aesthetics. It was the digital equivalent of a classic muscle car, lovingly maintained and radiating a sense of raw, untamed power. And sitting in a simple chair before the console, his back to the door, was a man. He was little more than a silhouette in the dim light. He was impossibly skeletal thin, his frame swallowed by a simple, oversized yellow t-shirt and loose-fitting cargo pants. He looked frail, wasted away, a hollowed-out version of a man. The man didn't turn around. He didn't seem surprised. "You are either very, very good, or very, very foolish to have found this place," he said. His voice was a dry, rasping whisper, devoid of the booming power Izuku had expected. It was the voice of a man in constant, weary pain. The lock on that door was not meant to be opened by anyone. It was a monument to a past I tried to bury. Izuku's throat was dry. His mind reeled. This couldn't be him. This frail, skeletal man couldn't be the mountain of muscle he had seen on the news. This couldn't be All Might. I was looking for someone. Izuku stammered, his voice sounding small and childish in the quiet room. A legend. 2 legends. The man was silent for a long moment. Then, with a pained, weary sigh, he slowly, stiffly, turned his chair around. Izuku's world tilted on its axis. The man's face was a gaunt, shadowed ruin. His cheeks were hollowed out, his eyes sunken deep into their sockets, 2 pools of brilliant, piercing blue in a sea of exhaustion. And his blonde hair, though thinner now, still had those 2 iconic bangs, though they drooped with a weariness that mirrored his own. It was him. It was Toshinori Yagi. It was All Might. Or rather, it was what was left of him. "Legends die, young man," Toshinori said, his voice raspy. He coughed, a deep, rattling sound, and when he pulled a handkerchief from his mouth, Izuku saw a dark stain of blood on the white cloth. "And ghosts should be left to rest. You should not have come here. Whatever trouble you are in, I cannot help you. My time for fighting is long over." He looked Izuku up and down, his piercing blue eyes taking in the courier jacket, the nervous energy, the fierce, desperate hope that must have been radiating from the boy's face. "You are the one they're calling Zero, aren't you? The ghost who poked Kageyama Financial and stole a whisper from a black site project. The one who went toe-to-toe with young Bakugo and lived to tell the tale. The net is buzzing with the bounty on your head. You have made powerful enemies." Izuku was stunned into silence. He knew. How could he possibly know? Toshinori gestured a bony hand toward the bank of ancient computers. "This equipment may be old, but it is not deaf. I hear the whispers. I see the ripples. A ripple like you are hard to miss. Then you know why I'm here," Izuku said, finding his voice, a surge of desperate energy cutting through his shock. "You know about Omnigen, what they're becoming. What they're doing. Project Chimera." He took a step forward and pulled the datachip from his pocket, the one containing the horrifying, fragmented log from the quirk regulator. He held it out like an offering. "I saw it," Izuku said, his voice trembling with a mixture of anger and remembered horror. "I saw what their technology does. They're experimenting on people. Hurting them. Killing them. And they're using your name, your symbol, to sell it to the world. Tashinori's gaze fell upon the data chip, and for a moment, an ancient, familiar fire sparked in the depths of his sunken eyes. A flicker of the hero he had once been, but it was quickly extinguished, smothered by a wave of profound, soul-deep weariness. "Do you think I do not know?" he rasped, his voice laced with a bitterness that was painful to hear. "I am their trained, muzzled dog, young man. I smile for their cameras, I read their scripts, and in return, they provide me with the medical technology that keeps me alive. And they keep my secret." He gestured to his side. With a pained grunt, he lifted his yellow t-shirt. Izuku recoiled, a gasp escaping his lips. The entire left side of Tashinori's torso was a horrific, mangled ruin of scar tissue. It was a crater, a puckered, discolored mess of flesh that looked as if something had tried to scoop out his insides. The damage was immense, catastrophic. This was his injury. The one that had ended his career. "The media tells you this was from a villain," Tashinori said, letting the shirt fall. "They lied. There was no toxic chainsaw. That was the cover story. This," he gestured to his ruined side, "was a field testing accident. An experimental omnigen weapon, an energy cannon they were developing for hero use. It malfunctioned. It took half my stomach, my entire respiratory system, it took all might. Omnigen's finest engineers buried the truth, and then they built a new cage of technology and medicine to keep their prize asset alive, if not well." The pieces of the puzzle slammed into place in Izuku's mind with dizzying force. The disappearance of the symbol. All Might's injury. Omnigen's rise to power. It was all connected. They hadn't just defeated their greatest critic, they had bought him, broken him, and put him on a leash. "They own me, Zero," Tashinori said, his voice heavy with self-loathing. "I am a symbol of their power, a constant reminder to anyone who might think of opposing them what happens when you fail. So, I tell you again, leave. Forget you ever found me. Fighting a corporation like Omnigen is not just foolish. It is suicide. I am the living proof." He turned his chair back toward the console, a clear, final dismissal. The conversation was over. Izuku stood frozen in the center of the room, his dreams crumbling around him. The hope that had carried him here, the desperate belief in the legend, it was all turning to dust. He had found his hero, only to discover a broken, jaded man waiting for death in a concrete tomb. The bitterness and disappointment were so sharp, they tasted like acid in his throat. But then, something else rose up. Not disappointment. Not pity. Anger. A fierce, righteous anger. An anger at Omnigen for what they had done. An anger at the world for letting them do it. And a strange, unexpected anger at Tashinori himself, for giving up. "No," Izuku said, his voice quiet but hard as steel. Tashinori didn't turn. "No, no," Izuku repeated, taking another step forward. "I won't leave. And I won't give up. And you're wrong." "Wrong about what, boy?" Tashinori sighed, the sound full of pity. "About why I'm here," Izuku said, his voice rising with passion. He wasn't talking to a broken man anymore. He was talking to a hero, whether that hero wanted to hear it or not. "I didn't come here looking for a weapon. I didn't come here for some legendary hacker to fight my battles for me. I didn't come here for revenge or for glory." He held up the data chip again. "I came here because of this. Because of the person whose life was destroyed by that device. Because of the people who will be next if someone doesn't stop them. I'm not doing this because I want to win. I'm doing it because there are people who are going to get hurt, and I can't stand by and do nothing. I thought you, of all people, would understand that." He was almost shouting now, the words pouring out of him, raw and unfiltered. "You talk about being a symbol of their power? You were the symbol of peace. You stood for something. You inspired millions of people, you inspired me. You taught me that a hero is someone who saves people with a smile. Someone who pushes past their limits for the sake of others. Has Omnigen beaten that out of you too? Did they take that from you along with your stomach? Or is it still in there somewhere?" Silence. A thick, heavy silence descended on the small room, broken only by the hum of the old computers. Slowly, agonizingly, Toshinori Yagi turned his chair around again. He looked at Izuku, and this time, it was a different look. The cynicism was gone. The weary dismissal was gone. He was looking at the boy, at his fierce, determined expression, his trembling fists, his eyes shining with an almost insane, selfless fire. And in those eyes, Toshinori saw a ghost. He saw a reflection of a younger man. A man with a powerful quirk and a heart full of boundless, reckless idealism. A man who believed he could save everyone. A man who charged into burning buildings and fought impossible odds, not for fame or money, but because it was the right thing to do. He saw himself, before the injury, before the compromise, before the crushing weight of his own failure had broken him. He saw a true hero's heart, beating in the chest of this terrified, determined boy. A single tear traced a path down Toshinori's gaunt, hollowed cheek. A long, shuddering breath escaped his lips, the first real, deep breath he seemed to have taken in a decade. The spark in his eyes, the one he had tried so hard to extinguish, flickered back to life. And this time, it did not die. "You have a dangerous amount of hope, young man," Toshinori whispered, his voice thick with emotion. He looked at his own frail, bony hands, and then back at Izuku. "I cannot be All Might anymore," he said softly. "That part of me is dead and buried. And my skills with this," he gestured to the console, "are a decade out of date. I am a relic." He took a breath. "But a relic can still be useful. It can teach. It can guide." He leaned forward, his brilliant blue eyes locking onto Izuku's with a newfound intensity. "I cannot fight this war for you. But I can teach you how to fight it yourself. I cannot be your sword, but I can be your shield. I can teach you strategy. I can teach you ideology. I can teach you what it truly means to be a symbol. A symbol that can't be bought, that can't be broken, that can't be owned." He offered a shaky, skeletal hand to the boy. "You have the heart, young Midoriya. And you have the power. But you lack the experience. Allow me to help you with that. Allow me to help you become the hero I failed to be." Izuku stared at the outstretched hand, his mind reeling, his heart soaring with a feeling so powerful it almost brought him to his knees. It was hope. Pure, undiluted hope. He had come looking for a legend and found a broken man. But in that broken man, he had found something far more valuable. A mentor. A teacher. A symbol reborn from the static and the ashes. He reached out and took Toshinori's hand. It was frail and bony, but there was a surprising strength in his grip. A promise. "Okay," Izuku whispered, his own tears finally starting to fall. "Okay." The alliance was forged. In a forgotten, concrete tomb at the edge of the world, Zero had found his symbol. The real one. And the war for the soul of Neo Muzurifu had truly begun.